The distress signal had been playing for 6 hours before anyone in the conquered fleet actually believed it. It was not a dramatic cry for help. It was worse than that. It was a list, a cold, factual list of ship names, sent one by one as each vessel confirmed total destruction. The Ardina Corridor, a long, narrow passage between two dense asteroid belts, had been considered a safe zone, a buffer, the kind of place where supply ships rested and old officers finished their careers quietly. Now it was a graveyard. 41 conquered vessels had entered the corridor at the start of the week. 18 remained. The Vreth Dominion had arrived not from the front, as expected, but from below, through a gravitational fold that conquered cartographers had marked as impassable. The Vreth did not care about maps. They had punched through anyway, split the conquered formation cleanly, and begun their work. The word work was the right one. The Vreth did not fight with fury or hatred. They fought the way a machine tightens a bolt methodically, without pause, without feeling. That was what made them so hard to stop. You could not scare them. You could not tire them. You could only try to outlast them, and the conquered was failing at that too. Commander Riva Solis was the only human on the bridge of the liaison vessel Steadfast. The Sareth crew around her were tall, gray-skinned, and deeply formal. They had always treated her with polite distance, not disrespect, just the quiet assumption that she was there to observe and stay out of the way. She had never complained, she had just watched, learned, waited. Now she stood at her console while Admiral Dre's voice filled the bridge, steady but thin at the edges, the voice of a commander running out of options. He was calling for a staged withdrawal. It was the right call. It was also the kind of call that meant the corridor was lost, the buffer was gone, and the Vreth would reach the Conquered's inner systems within the year. The Sareth around her began withdrawal procedures in silence, everything precise, everything correct, everything too late. Riva was not looking at the tactical display. She was looking at her personal console, at a message from Earth's Unified Defense Ministry, routed through 4 relay stations, compressed into a packet so small the Steadfast systems had flagged it as sensor noise. She had almost missed it. The message contained exactly one word. Anvil. She read it once. Then she closed the channel, folded her hands on the console, and looked out at the stars beyond the viewport. The battle was still playing out across the display behind her, red markers blinking out one by one, Vreth formations advancing in their clean, mechanical lines. Navigator Vane, a young Sareth with careful eyes, glanced at her, the way junior officers do when they want to ask something but are too disciplined to break protocol. Finally, he spoke. Commander Solis, your assessment of the withdrawal timeline. Riva did not answer right away. She was doing math in her head, not tactical math, not the kind that Vane was used to. A different kind. The kind that involved distance, drive signatures, and a ship that was not on any conquered registry. The withdrawal, she said at last, may become unnecessary. Vane blinked. That was a significant expression for a Sareth. The corridor is compromised. The Admiral has ordered. I know what the Admiral ordered. She turned to face him, and there was something in her expression that Vane had never seen on her before. Not panic, not hope exactly. Something calmer and older than hope. I need you to do something for me. Watch the far edge of the corridor, the western entry point, the one the Vreth came from. That area is fully under Vreth control. Yes, Riva said, watch it anyway. Vane held her gaze for a moment, then turned back to his station. Around them, the Steadfast hummed through its withdrawal preparations. The red markers kept blinking out. Dre's voice kept giving orders. And Riva stood still and waited and said nothing more. 4 minutes later, something entered the western edge of the corridor. It did not announce itself. It did not come through with a flash or a roar or any of the entry signatures that every species in the galaxy used when dropping out of faster-than-light travel. It was simply not there, and then it was. like a word appearing on a page between one blink and the next. It was enormous, dark-hulled, running no lights. The steadfast sensors reached for it and found almost nothing, a shape, a mass reading, and silence where a transponder signal should have been. Vane's voice came out very quietly. "Commander, what is that?" Riva looked at the shape on the display, at its size, at the clean, angular lines she recognized from a classified briefing she had attended 3 years ago on a rainy afternoon in Geneva. "That," she said, "is Earth's answer." On the Vreth Fleet channel, which Riva had been quietly monitoring for months, something unprecedented happened. The Vreth Tactical Network, which had never once paused in 6 hours of continuous slaughter, went completely silent. Not because they had been destroyed, not because they had been ordered to stop. Because every targeting system in the Vreth fleet had just tried to lock onto the new arrival and failed. Every single one of them, simultaneously. The Vreth, for the first time in 30 years of unbroken conquest, did not know what to do next. The galaxy in that moment held its breath. 6 months before the Ardina corridor burned, a Sareth analyst named Vane had been handed a data chip and told to read it alone. He had done so in a small room on the lower level of the Conquered Intelligence Bureau, under the kind of lighting that made everything look slightly orange. The chip contained a dossier. The dossier was about Earth, specifically about what Earth had been building in the dark space beyond the orbit of its 7th planet, far from any shipping lane, for the past 3 decades. Vane had read it twice. Then he had set the chip down on the table and stared at the wall for a long time. He was not a man who startled easily. He had processed intelligence on 17 civilizations, read accounts of weapons that cracked moons and plagues that ended species. He considered himself professionally unshockable. The Earth dossier had shaken him, not because of the scale of what they had built, because of the patience. 30 years, quiet, no announcements, no treaty consultations, just steady, invisible work conducted by a species the galaxy had politely written off as promising but limited. They were well-liked in the way that harmless things are well-liked. No one had been watching them carefully enough. The human delegate who had handed Vane the dossier was a woman named Petra. She was older, unhurried, and had the particular stillness of someone who had been waiting a long time to have a certain conversation. She sat across from him while he read, and she did not fidget. When he looked up, she spoke first. "We filed 11 requests over 12 years for joint development of advanced defense systems. Each was deferred. The standard response was that the Concord's fleet was sufficient and independent development was discouraged." Vane had been on the committee that deferred 2 of those requests. He did not say so. "We are not angry," Petra continued. "We understood the politics, but we also understood what it feels like to be nearly wiped out and have no one come. We went through that once before contact. We decided quietly that we would never be in that position again, not for ourselves, and not for anyone we had promised to stand beside." The ship in the dossier was called the Iron Meridian. It was not a fleet. It was one vessel. Earth had decided after years of study that the future of the Concord's conflict with the Vreth would not be won by numbers. The Vreth had more ships, more resources, more centuries of military refinement. It would be won, if at all, by a single moment of decisive superiority. A pivot point. Something that could change the shape of an entire battle in minutes. So they had built one ship, and they had built it to be, in every measurable sense, the most capable military vessel ever constructed. They had studied Vreth shield technology for 15 years and found its resonance flaw, a frequency-based vulnerability that the Vreth had never bothered to patch, because no one in the galaxy had ever thought to look for it. The Iron Meridian's weapons were built around that flaw specifically. They did not overpower Vreth shields. They unmade them, the way a tuning fork unmakes silence. They had redesigned their drive system 4 times. each time pushing closer to a theoretical limit that the Concord's own engineers had declared unreachable. The final version moved the Iron Meridian at speeds that should have been impossible for a vessel of its mass. It did not seem to care about that assessment. They had equipped it with a stealth system that did not just hide the ship from sensors. It fed those sensors false data, calm data, the kind of data that said nothing interesting was happening here. The Vreth targeting systems that had locked onto and destroyed 41 conquered vessels without error had just encountered that system, and they had believed it completely. Back in the corridor, the Iron Meridian sat in silence while the Vreth fleet tried to understand what was in front of them. On the Steadfast, Vane pulled everything his sensors could find. The mass reading was enormous. The energy signature was unlike anything in the Concord database. The hull material did not exist in any registry. Earth had developed it over 11 years of research in a facility that officially studied agricultural compounds. Riva watched him work. She had known Vane for 2 years. She had watched him be careful and precise and thoroughly unimpressed by almost everything. She watched his expression now. "Commander," he said, and his voice had changed. "The Vreth command vessel just changed heading." "Away from us." "Away from the Iron Meridian," he confirmed. "They are repositioning, all of them." A Vreth fleet repositioning was not retreat. It was recalculation. They were buying time to understand what they were facing. They were doing the same thing Vane was doing, running assessments, pulling data, trying to build a picture. The difference was that every second they spent recalculating was a second they were not advancing. "Open a channel to the Iron Meridian," Riva said. Vane looked at her. "On what frequency?" "Try the Earth Defense Standard, Channel 9. He did. The channel opened, and from the other end came a voice, unhurried, slightly rough, the voice of a man who had clearly not slept in some time. "Steadfast, this is Iron Meridian. Good to hear a friendly signal. We have been watching the situation for about 4 minutes. We are ready when the Admiral gives the word." Riva closed her eyes for exactly 1 second. Then she opened them. "Iron Meridian. The Admiral is going to need a moment to process the fact that you exist." A short pause, then from the other end a quiet laugh. "We get that a lot." Admiral Dre had commanded fleets for 62 years. He had fought the Pelhari incursion, survived the collapse at Marin Station, once held a rear-guard position for 9 hours with 4 damaged ships so a convoy could escape. His junior officers said, unkindly, that the Admiral did not rattle because nothing was left inside him to shake. When the Iron Meridian appeared on his tactical display, he said nothing for 47 seconds. His bridge crew counted. They told each other about it later, the way soldiers remember strange, small details from extraordinary moments. Finally, one of his officers, a young Sareth named Tail, broke the silence. "Admiral, the vessel is broadcasting on Earth's defense channel. They are requesting orders." Dre looked at the shape on his display. He looked at the mass reading. He looked at the speed and trajectory data that his systems were reporting with the slightly confused quality of instruments that were working correctly, but did not believe their own output. "Get Commander Solis," he said. Riva was already on the channel. She had anticipated this. "Admiral, the vessel is the Iron Meridian. It is an Earth Defense Ministry asset. It is here in response to the emergency signal from the corridor. I can brief you fully after the engagement, but the short version is, it is on our side and it can fight." Another pause, shorter this time. "Can it fight the Vreth?" Dre asked. The question was careful. He was a man who had watched the Vreth dismantle everything the Conquered threw at them for 20 years, and he was not in the habit of easy optimism. "Admiral," Riva said, "it was built specifically for the Vreth." On board the Iron Meridian, Captain Orlin Bast was standing at a console that displayed the Vreth fleet formation in 3 dimensions. He was 54 years old, gray at the temples, and had the posture of someone who had spent a great deal of time in low-gravity environments. His crew of 112 were at their stations, and the bridge was very quiet in the way that a room full of people holding their breath is quiet. His weapons officer, a young woman named Dara, was running the targeting alignment for the third time, not because it needed checking, because she needed something to do with her hands. "Alignment confirmed," she said. "I heard you the first 2 times," Bass said, without any sharpness in it. He opened the command channel to the Vreth fleet, not because he expected surrender. 30 years of history made that clear, but because the offer had to be made. His crew had heard him say it. You give the warning not for them, but for yourself. So when it is over, you know what kind of person you were. He spoke in Vreth dialect, learned over 6 years. A harsh, clicking language with very few words for negotiation and many words for grades of victory. He told them a new force had entered the engagement. That withdrawal was available. That if they refused, he would disable their fleet, not destroy it, and their crews would return home. He gave them 11 seconds. The Vreth Grand Marshal, whose name, translated roughly, meant something like unbroken record, responded in 7. The response, translated from the original, was approximately, "There is nothing in this corridor that changes the outcome of this war." Bast closed the channel. "Dara," he said, "start with the left flank dreadnought." What happened next was difficult to describe from outside. Several officers attempted it in official reports with varying success. The Iron Meridian moved covering distance at a speed the conquered vessels, which were not slow, simply could not match. It crossed from the western entry to the edge of the Vreth formation in the time it took Vane to reach for his console, and then stop, because there was nothing useful he could do. The weapon discharge was not what anyone expected. There was no visible beam, no explosion. The left flank dreadnought, a Vreth vessel 4 times the mass of the largest conquered warship, simply stopped returning targeting data. Its shields did not fail under pressure. They unraveled frequency by frequency, like a knot being pulled loose from one specific thread. The ship went dark. Still intact, crew still alive inside. Just dark. "What did they do?" Tail asked on the Steadfast's bridge. Vane was already running the analysis. "The weapon resonates at a specific harmonic," he said slowly, reading as he spoke. "The Vreth shielding system operates on a layered frequency band. The weapon found the base frequency and he stopped, recalculated. It sang the shield apart." Tail looked at him. "It sang." "I don't have a better word," Vane admitted. The second dreadnought took 40 seconds. It had begun rotating its shield band to a different frequency. The Iron Meridian adjusted. The Vreth had not known the weapon could do that. Now they did, and the knowledge was not useful. The third went dark in 20 seconds. 3 dreadnoughts disabled without destruction in under 5 minutes. On the Vreth command vessel, the Grand Marshal was receiving a report. The new vessel's weapon could not be blocked, the vessel itself could not be targeted, and total fleet disablement was projected within 40 minutes. He did not respond for a long time. Across the corridor, Admiral Dre watched the display with the expression of a man reassembling his understanding of the universe in real time. He asked his question to no one in particular. "How long have they been capable of this?" Riva, on the open channel, heard him. She gave the only honest answer she had. "Long enough, Admiral, long enough." The trap arrived disguised as a retreat. It was elegant. That was what Riva kept thinking afterward, not how dangerous it was, but how elegant. The Grand Marshal had understood within 10 minutes that his fleet could not win. His targeting systems were blind, his shields singing themselves apart. He had the data. He had accepted the data. Then he did something the Vreth had not done in 30 years. He ordered a pullback, not full retreat, a repositioning of the rear formation away from the western entry. On every conquered tactical display, the red markers moved backward. Dre's bridge released a careful, collective breath. The pullback revealed a Vreth subfleet that had been hiding behind the corridor's southern asteroid belt. These ships had not been part of the engagement. They had been waiting. Now they moved not toward the Iron Meridian, not toward the conquered fleet, but toward the eastern exit, the one the conquered was supposed to escape through. At the same time, 4 Vreth destroyers positioned themselves at the mouth of the corridor's northern fold, the gravitational anomaly the Vreth had used to enter. They fired not at ships but at the fold itself, precisely, deliberately. The fold collapsed inward. The gravitational wave hit the corridor like a slow tide, not destructive on its own but deeply destabilizing. The asteroid belts on both sides began to shift. Escape trajectories that had been clean 2 minutes ago were now threading through moving debris fields. The eastern exit was blocked. The western entry was Vreth territory. The corridor, which had been a trap for the conquered fleet all week, had just become a different kind of trap, with the Iron Meridian inside it. On the Steadfast, Riva watched the new geometry form on her display and felt a specific kind of cold settle in her chest. Not fear. She knew what fear felt like. This was the cold of a person who has just understood a problem completely and is not yet sure if the solution exists. Vane spoke beside her. The corridor is destabilizing. The central mass is, he paused, recalculating. We have perhaps 22 minutes before debris density makes any exit route non-viable. Riva was already on the Iron Meridian's channel. Orlin, talk to me. A beat, then Bast's voice steady, giving nothing away. We see it, working the problem. Inside the Iron Meridian, Engineer Nato was running 3 calculations on 2 consoles and a handheld unit. He was 29. The youngest on the engineering team, selected for what his supervisors called aggressive improvisation, the ability to find solutions that were technically possible even when technically unwise. The solution he was looking at now was technically possible. He brought it to Bast in person. He walked to the captain's station, stood in front of him and laid the handheld unit on the console. Bast read the figures. He read them again. The experimental drive, Bast said. Yes. The one we were told not to activate in a live gravity well. Yes. What does it do to the corridor if we fire it? Nato pulled up the projection. It punches a temporary fold in the local space, a clean one, not like the Vreth technique, wide enough for the full conquered fleet to transit, about 6 minutes wide. Then it closes. Bast studied the projection and the drive. Nato met his eyes. The stress on the drive housing will be significant. I think it survives. I am not fully certain. What does not fully certain mean in numbers? 73% chance the drive housing holds. 27% chance we lose 2 of the 4 drive units. And the crew? Nato did the separate math without being asked. If we lose 2 drive units and manage the failure correctly, 94% that everyone goes home. Bast was quiet for 3 seconds. Around the bridge, his crew continued their work, tracking the debris, monitoring the Vreth positions, managing systems. None of them stopped to listen because they were professionals. But the bridge was a small space, and the conversation was not entirely private, and no one was pretending otherwise. Do it, Bast said. Nato nodded once and went back to his station. The Iron Meridian moved to the center of the corridor, positioned itself between the conquered ships and the advancing Vreth rear guard, and fired its drive in a configuration no conquered science team had ever documented. A fold opened ahead, clean-edged, stable, large enough for a dozen ships side by side. Dre gave the evacuation order. The fleet moved. The Iron Meridian did not. It held position, facing the Vreth, while every surviving conquered vessel went through first. On the Steadfast, as it crossed the threshold, Vane looked back one last time. The vast dark shape was still in the corridor, covering the exit. They are going last, Vane said. Riva did not answer. She already knew. The iron meridian crossed through the fold with 30 seconds to spare. On the other side, when the fold closed and the corridor collapsed into debris behind them, Nato's projection proved accurate. 2 drive units were gone. Their housing cracked cleanly along the stress fractures he had predicted. The ship was mobile but reduced. 2 crew members had been in the secondary hull section when a final Vreth kinetic round struck the unshielded surface. Their names were recorded in the ship's log within 30 seconds. Bast read them himself and said nothing. His crew understood the silence was not coldness. It was the only size appropriate for what it was carrying. On the Steadfast, Vane filed his field report. In the notes section, he wrote a single line. They went last. The most powerful vessel in the engagement waited until every Allied ship was safe before it crossed. This detail should not be forgotten. He submitted it and sat quietly and did not need to say anything more. The Conquered Emergency Council was not supposed to be angry. They had won. That was the uncomfortable truth when the session opened. 18 ships had survived a battle where 41 had entered. The Vreth advance had been stopped for the first time in 2 decades, and the species responsible was sitting across the table looking patient and slightly tired. 4 representatives had already filed formal grievance motions before the session began. The mood was the kind that forms when people are relieved and frightened and proud all at once and do not know which feeling they are allowed to show. Councillor Meth of the Pelhari, a species with 4 upper limbs and the political instincts of someone who had been in rooms like this for a very long time, spoke first. He was not loud. He was precise. Earth has been a conquered member for 40 years, he said. In that time, the Coalition Treaty has required member species to disclose all military development projects above a certain threshold. The Iron Meridian, by any measure, exceeds that threshold by a significant margin. We would like an explanation for why this disclosure was not made. The chamber was quiet. Eyes, various colors, various numbers from various anatomies, turned toward the human delegation. Ambassador Petra stood. She was in her 60s, unhurried, with gray hair cut short and the posture of someone who had prepared for this conversation for years, not with defensiveness, with clarity. Councillor Meth, she said, Earth submitted 11 formal requests over 12 years for joint development of advanced defense systems. The first was filed in year 7 of our membership. The last was filed in year 19. Each was deferred by this council. We have the documentation here if the council would like to review it. She placed a data slate on the table. She did not push it toward anyone. She left it there. The standard response to each request, she continued, was that the Concord's combined fleet was sufficient, that Earth was not under direct threat, and that independent military development outside the coalition framework was discouraged. She paused. We understood the political reasoning. Older members protecting established structures. We have enough history of our own to recognize that pattern. Meth's expression did not change. That does not address the disclosure requirement. No, Petra agreed. It addresses the context. She looked around the chamber not confrontationally but steadily. When we first joined the Conquered, we were genuinely grateful. We had just ended a war among ourselves that had nearly finished us entirely. Contact with the wider galaxy felt like being handed something we had not earned yet. We were careful. We were quiet. We listened. She picked up the data slate and set it back down. Then the Vreth came, and we watched the coalition lose. We asked to help build something better. We were told it was not necessary. Her voice did not rise. It became quieter. We have a word for what it feels like to need help and find that no one is coming. We have it because we lived through it. We decided as a people that we would never be that word again, not for ourselves, and not for anyone we had sworn to stand beside. The chamber was very still. We did not hide the Iron Meridian out of distrust, Petra said. We hid it because we had tried repeatedly to build it openly and were told no. We found another way. We do not apologize for finding another way. Counselor Reth of the Dravani, a quiet species, amphibious, who rarely spoke in open session, made a sound that his translator rendered as a question. You built it for the Vreth specifically? Yes. You studied them. For 15 years, their shield systems, their tactical patterns, their weaknesses. Petra looked at Reth directly. No one else was doing this work, we checked. Another silence. This one had a different quality, the quality of a room full of people who were, slowly and with difficulty, updating their picture of a species they thought they had fully understood. Counselor Meth said, after a moment, the 2 crew members who died in the engagement. Petra's expression shifted very slightly. Yes. They were honored. Their names were recorded immediately. Their families were notified within the hour. We do not have a formal state ceremony for this. We have something quieter. Their names go into a record that is never closed. Meth nodded slowly. He had been in this chamber for 40 years. He realized sitting there that he had never looked at the human delegation carefully enough. None of them had. The grievance motions were not withdrawn. Politics moved slowly. But they were not advanced either, placed, as the Concord saying went, in the long consideration pile, where documents went when the people who filed them were no longer sure they should have. After the session, Vane found Riva in the corridor and fell into step beside her without announcing himself, unusual for a Sarath. The ambassador spoke well, he said. She always does. She said Earth went through something, before contact. The fracture wars, 40 years of it. Riva did not elaborate. Most species needed a moment. Vane took his. Then, is that why the Iron Meridian went last? Riva thought about it. We have a phrase, you don't leave people behind. It is not a military rule not written in any regulation. It is just something we decided somewhere along the way that we were going to be. The kind of people who go last. Vane walked quietly for a moment. Then, with some effort, Sareth did not offer this kind of statement easily. I think the Conquered has misjudged your species for a long time. Yes, Riva said without bitterness, you have. She said it the way someone states the weather. Not to wound. Just because it was true. The Iron Meridian sat in dry dock at Concord Station Row like a dark mountain that had decided to rest. 2 of its 4 drive units had been removed. The hull section that had taken the kinetic strike was open, a wound being closed by Earth engineers who had arrived 3 days after the battle carrying equipment the station crew had never seen. The dock crew had tried to help on the first day. The engineers thanked them in 3 different languages and continued working alone. The ship was still enormous even in repair, filling the dock in a way that made the dock feel undersized. Station crew came to the observation gallery during off hours just to look at it. None of them were sure why. It was not beautiful, too angular, too dark, no attempt at elegance. It had been built to do something, and it looked exactly like what it was. Captain Orlin Bast had been in Dock Bay 7 for most of the morning, not supervising. His engineers did not need supervising, but present. He sat on a crate near the secondary hull access with a mug of coffee going cold beside him and a maintenance report on his datapad that he was not reading. He was looking at the open hull section, at the place where the kinetic round had hit. The round had not been guided, a last reflex shot from a Vreth destroyer, finding the one unshielded section of the hull, a secondary corridor that had always been deprioritized. In years of construction and testing, it had never been flagged as a vulnerability. He had been thinking about that. The gap that is always there, unseen until it costs you something. He was not going to be at peace with it, and he had decided that was correct. Any version of himself that found peace with it too quickly was not the version he wanted to be. Riva arrived with a thermos and a second mug, found a crate near his and sat down without announcing herself. She poured and handed him the mug. He accepted it. They sat without speaking. a habit built over 2 years on adjacent ships, the ability to share space without filling it. After a while, Bast asked, "How did the council session go?" "About how you'd expect," Riva said. "Angry, then complicated, then quiet. Petra handled it. She always does. She said a thing I keep thinking about." Riva turned the mug in her hands. "She told them that we did not hide the ship out of distrust. We hid it because we had tried to build it openly and been told no. And we found another way." She paused. "I think that landed, not immediately, but it landed." Bast nodded. He looked back at the open hull. "What does Earth do now?" Riva asked. "With the Meridian, with everything." He was quiet for a moment, choosing the answer carefully. "The ship works," he said. "The Vreth know it works. Their expansion has stopped. Intelligence confirmed that yesterday. The Grand Marshal has been recalled. There is no new advance being planned." He looked at the dark hull. "The point was never to conquer anyone. The point was to make the cost of coming for us and for anyone beside us too high to justify. If that is what has happened, then the ship has done its job. And if they come back, then we will be here." It was not a boast. It was the way you state a fact about a door being locked. On the upper level of the dock, 2 cadets from a Sarath training vessel docked at the station were watching through the observation window. They were young, the Sarath equivalent of mid-teens, and had been talking in the low-voiced way of people who think they are not being overheard, though the gallery acoustics were better than they appeared. One of them was describing what she had seen on the tactical feeds from the corridor battle. The other had not seen them yet, had only heard about it, and was asking the question that anyone would ask. But what are they actually like, the humans up close? The first one thought about it. She had spent 3 days at this station. She had eaten in the shared mess hall. She had watched the Earth engineering teamwork. She had passed Riva in a corridor once and nodded, and received a nod back and a brief, unguarded smile that had lasted less than a second but had seemed entirely genuine. "They laugh a lot," she said, "louder than makes sense for how small they are. And they remember everything, every bad thing that happened to them, every lesson, every mistake, but they do not seem crushed by it. They carry it and still show up, still make noise." She searched for better words and did not quite find them. "I think that is why they are dangerous. Not because they do not feel. They feel everything, but it does not stop them. Nothing stops them." The second cadet considered this for a moment, looking down at the dark, vast, quietly resting ship below. "I do not think I would want to be their enemy," he said. "No," said the first. "I do not think anyone should want that anymore." Down in Dock Bay 7, Bast finished his coffee. Riva refilled it without being asked. The engineers worked steadily in the open hull, replacing the burned drive housing piece by piece, closing the gap, making the ship whole again. Outside the station, the galaxy was quieter than it had been in 20 years. Not peaceful, peace was a long road and they were barely at the beginning of it, but quieter. The kind of quiet that comes when something large and dangerous has paused to reconsider. It was for now enough.